Two former WWE champions have called out Vince McMahon, one of them even telling the former chairman of the board to, quote, rot in hell. We're going to tell you who exactly those two stars are, why they may have said so, what is the reason for their animosity towards the chairman of the board. I can think of quite a few. We're also going to provide a massive update on the AEW WBD streaming negotiations. What was the latest offer from WBD? We have a little bit of insight about that courtesy of FightfulSelect.com. All that and much more coming up right here in this video. So be sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get notified whenever a new video is released. All right. So first things first, we got to talk about Vince McMahon. Of course, amid all of the talk and speculation about McMahon, his personal life and what have you, there's this lawsuit that is pending. And, you know, like we had heard that many of the proceedings were kind of frozen with respect to a potential federal investigation, potentially a warrant that was going to be issued for Vince McMahon. None of that has materialized as of yet. Again, these things take time. We do know that he is indeed being investigated by the feds, and he was investigated by the SEC. His home was raided a while back. We know that there's this lawsuit from a former WWE employee who alleges that McMahon, among many other things, abused her and trafficked her. And we also know that McMahon is someone who has made quite the number of enemies in the professional wrestling business. Two of those enemies are Bret Hart and Ronda Rousey. We begin with Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey recently spoke about Vince McMahon, shared her thoughts on McMahon, and here's what she had to say on Insight with Chris Van Fleet.
Knew that me and Shayna were actually friends.
Why couldn't the Becky match happen at WrestleMania?
Because, I don't know, Vince is fucking an 80-year-old asshole.
So there's no love lost here with Vince McMahon.
No. Vince McMahon, John Laurinaitis, Bruce Pritchard, they can all suck a dick.
Well, there you heard it. Ronda Rousey, not mincing words, basically saying literally saying Vince McMahon, Bruce Pritchard, John Laurinaitis can all, you know what. Of course, we've heard Ronda Rousey say similar things ever since she started doing this media tour. One of the running themes throughout has been her disgust at not only Vince McMahon and the way he ran WWE, the way he, in many ways, handled her second run in WWE, but also just the way that all of the stories that have come out about McMahon have just, affected like her perception of the man. I think it is clear that Ronda is, like many people, who falls into a camp of they see Vince McMahon now and they see him as a disgusting, deplorable monster. I know certainly, in my opinion, that's what Vince McMahon is. And it is hard to argue with that. And if you notice, other person she said there to S her D was John Laurinaitis. And Laurinaitis is also implicated in this lawsuit from a former WWE employee. And, obviously we've covered this. There's a lot of disgusting stuff in that lawsuit that Vince McMahon allegedly did. And it's horrifying when you really think about it. Bryan Danielson even was asked about that situation by the Gorilla Position recently. And he was asked about Vince McMahon and how his perception of Vince has changed. And he said, it's been, as he essentially said, it's been like weird coming to grips with it. But, in many ways, like his sympathies, like, are with the people that were truly affected by this. And, it's like a weird thing because, his father-in-law, John Laurinaitis in this case, or former father-in-law, which he indicated, is also implicated in this, that being John Laurinaitis. And it's a weird thing to talk about. So, and he also understands like Brie is also kind of like impacted by this, considering that is her mom's husband or soon-to-be ex-husband, whatever the situation there is. And I think like that kind of gets to like this, like those people who have like the more personal connection with Vince McMahon, they seem to have a harder time coming to grips with this. And to a degree, that's understandable. I think Brian's is a case where it's a lot more understandable than a lot of other people. Not saying like, like obviously like for a lot of people, like, their entire perception of this guy like came crashing down. But at the same time, for people like John Cena who like don't really answer the question, for people, who just kind of skirt around it's very, very strange to see that, especially when you have other talent who are not as outspoken or who are outspoken about the way they feel about Vince McMahon. One of those talent just happens to be the man, the myth, the legend, the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be, I should say, Bret Hitman Hart.
I didn't charge him or anything. We actually walked up to each other and locked up like a wrestling match. And then I knocked him out with one punch, and it was the greatest punch I ever threw. It was an absolutely beautiful uppercut right between his arms, and I lifted him about a foot off the ground, broke my hand, but it was the sweetest punch I ever threw, and I wouldn't change anything about it. And Vince McMahon can rot now.
Vince McMahon can rot in hell. Of course, Bret Hart, someone who has no love lost for Vince McMahon. Their beef, their feud, their everything has been going back ever since the late 90s, the Montreal Screwjob. And Bret Hart feeling like he was screwed by Vince McMahon out of the World Championship in his home country of Canada. And I don't think anything that's happened over the last couple of months has helped. And overall, like the reason I'm covering this is because alongside the lawsuit, right? And I think the lawsuit is obviously the most important thing and the thing that we should give the most attention to. But alongside that, there is this deeper story of like the demise of pro wrestling's most powerful figure. And it has been a demise that has been a long time coming. We have known about the allegations, or there have been rumblings at least about allegations going back to the 80s. We've talked about Rita Chatterton before. There was the Ring Boy scandal that Vince McMahon allegedly knew about. There's all of these NDAs, millions of dollars of NDAs, some of whom have been WWE talent. Something had to come to a head. And like as we're kind of telling this story, and maybe one day I'll get the chance to like kind of tell this more long form. One of the things to keep an eye on and that's going to like help shape this is, the reaction that we're getting from people within the company and also people who have been around Vince McMahon. Cody's probably been like, Cody and Punk are two interesting ones, because if you go back to the Royal Rumble, Cody in the way he talked about Vince was very different than what many people were saying even at the time. At the time, it was like, this is someone I've spent like a lot of time with. This is someone who look up to like a father, all that kind of stuff. Like a similar answer to what John Cena gave. And then they went into like kind of being like, well, but I don't know anything about this, separating themselves from it. Cody gave a very honest answer, which was like, everything that is alleged needs to be investigated. And like, Punk, like much more stronger answer, which was basically like, my sympathies are solely with the victims and the people who were impacted. And he was not kind to Vince McMahon, and he believes that it's a good thing that Vince is gone. And I think like that's one thing many people can agree. It's probably a good thing that Vince is gone, but it is just interesting every time we hear, like more people kind of speak out about Vince McMahon. I mean, again, Bret Hart and Ronda Rousey are two people that we shouldn't be too surprised about. But it is still worth noting given their high stature within professional wrestling. Anyway, that's what we got to talk about for Vince here. Let's move on and talk about AEW news. Hard to shift tones, but we're just going to go right into it. Let's talk about All Elite Wrestling. We have an update about their streaming deal. There's been talk about them being at the 10-yard line, the goal line. Tony Khan wearing the WBD hat everywhere, essentially saying that the deal is done by not saying that the deal is done. But here's what FightfulSelect.com had to say about this. Sean Ross Sapp and Company, for the full description, or for the full article, go check out the description. But here's an excerpt from that article saying, quote, one WBD source called the offer, quote, extensive, but didn't elaborate on what that meant outside of saying that the terms of the deal were, quote, literally extensive, but that the offer is in AEW's hands and that they are reviewing it. AEW and WBD seem optimistic that a deal would be agreed to, but we didn't hear of when an announcement could be made. Sources close to the situation said that even previous to the most recent offer, All Elite Wrestling had been offered at least double the amount of their previous deal. A few important things to note is that there is no publicly available numbers for their current television deal, and that the deal evolved greatly over the body of the deal. It's also worth noting that we don't know if at least double or the same amount of programming or if additional elements are involved. For those of you who may be wondering what our baseline for this is, I think the report, rightly so, calls out that we don't really have one. What we have to work off of is the original deal that they signed for basically just AEW Dynamite back in 2020. That was 4 years, $175 million, which amounts to right around $45 million per year. Now, again, I want to be clear. This was essentially a deal just for Dynamite. This does not include Collision. This does not include Rampage. This does not include what many people believe is also going to be a part of this deal, the tape library. This does not include another part that many people believe is going to be in the deal, the potential for pay-per-view offerings. This does not include the Battle of the Belts even, I don't think. So there's a whole lot that still needs to be kind of figured out. We don't know what the current deal is, but even if you want to like ballpark it, and again, this is reckless speculation on my part, but even if you want to ballpark it at around like $75 million per year that AEW is getting with their current deal now, like double that would be $150 million per year, which would be likely enough to make them profitable over a 5-year deal, let's say. That would be $750 over 5 years. And again, reckless speculation. I want to say reckless speculation on my part. So this is, take it with a grain of salt, all that kind of stuff. I'm telling you now. But that's kind of what we're looking at. And again, double could mean a lot. And we also need to know that offer was a previous offer that seemed to have been made. So we don't know if the current offer is even more, less, what have you. We don't know the number, but we do know that it looks like AEW is getting a significant increase as expected on their media rights deal. Reasons for this are things that I've talked about in other videos, but one of the main ones is I think there's a lot of trust with the AEW brand and Warner, and there's a lot of potential for growth, both I think in the pay-per-view offerings, because for pay-per-view, a model that WWE, for at least professional wrestling, had declared dead just over 10 years ago, AEW has proven that to be wrong. 100,000 pay-per-view buys every month is a massive deal. So for AEW to still be doing that and still be doing good business there, that shows that there is promise and there is the potential for even more, I think, value there for Warner Brothers Discovery. That's why I think they want to be in on it. Whether that's going to be a part of Max, whether it's going to be a part of a separate platform, we still don't know. There's a whole hullabaloo about essentially a judge knocking down the idea of them merging together, them being Disney, Hulu, and Max, to kind of come together into one sports streaming platform. Again, this would have just been for sports, so that may not be moving forward in the way that people thought it would. So here we are. Personally, I am of the opinion that they have a deal done, or at least the principles have been agreed to, and essentially they're just working out like nitty gritty details amongst lawyers, which is usually what ends up happening with this kind of stuff. And then they're waiting to announce it. And here's another thing to note, and a very important thing that people are getting wrong that I want to make sure that they understand. All Elite Wrestling signing this deal ensures that at the start of January, it goes into effect. So the potential, even if they announce it Wednesday, it is highly unlikely, I will say 99% chance, that All In will not be available on Max. For those of you who are wondering, it will not happen. It is going to be on pay-per-view. Expect to pay $50 a month, or if you have a VPN, significantly less. But any like change in that, I think, if hypothetically there's like a higher tier on Max, you have to pay like $10 extra a month for, and you get the AEW pay-per-views or whatever it might be. Any of that doesn't go into effect until January. So that's when I think you could expect to see the tape library. That's when I think you could expect to see the next day rights show up, like Dynamite like being added to Max the next day. That's when I think you could see simulcasting, whatever ends up being in the deal. That's when all that stuff is going to take into place. Because remember, their 4-year deal expires in January of 20, or their deal expires in January of 2025. So just, again, want to make sure that people understand that. That's kind of where we stand now. AEW, baby. We're still waiting for this deal. I think it's just a matter of time at this point. I mean, Tony Khan is out there looking like a fool with this Warner Brothers Discovery at this point. So we'll see what ends up happening, though, guys. Let me know in the comment section what you guys have to say about all of this. I want to hear from y'all. Also, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Until next time, be happy, be healthy, and as always, keep it real.